The widow's hands trembled as she laid her late husband's boots on the wooden counter of the general store, knowing she had no other choice but to sell the last piece of him she owned. Natalie Foster stood in the dusty establishment in Tascosa, Texas, a town that had seen better days in this year of 1883, and watched as the shopkeeper examined the fine leather with critical eyes that made her stomach turn with anxiety. She needed the money desperately, and every day that passed without income brought her closer to losing the small homestead that Thomas had worked so hard to build before the fever took him 6 months ago. "I can give you $3, the shopkeeper said, his voice flat and dismissive. "They're worn, and I don't know who would want them." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. $3 would barely buy flour and beans for 2 weeks. She had hoped for at least 8, maybe 10 if luck smiled upon her. The boots were handmade, imported leather from back east, one of the few luxuries Thomas had allowed himself after their first successful harvest. She opened her mouth to argue when a deep voice cut through the stale air of the shop. "I'll give you $20 for them." Both Natalie and the shopkeeper turned to see a tall man standing near the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking most of the afternoon sunlight that tried to filter through. He stepped forward, and Natalie could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of warm amber. His clothes were clean but worn, the mark of a working man who took care of what he owned. There was something solid about him, something that reminded her of the oak trees that lined the creek back home. $20, the shopkeeper sputtered. "Ethan, those boots aren't worth." $20, the man named Ethan repeated, his gaze never leaving Natalie's face. "They look to be about my size, and good leather is hard to come by." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out the bills with practiced ease. "That is, if the lady is willing to sell to me instead." Natalie found herself nodding before her mind fully caught up with her actions. $20 was more than she had dared hope for, more than would keep her fed through the winter if she was careful. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, thank you." The man stepped closer, and she caught the scent of sage and clean sweat, the smell of honest work under the Texas sun. He handed her the money, and when their fingers touched briefly during the exchange, she felt a jolt run through her that had nothing to do with relief over the sale. His hands were calloused but gentle, and there was kindness in his eyes that made her want to weep for reasons she couldn't quite name. "Ethan Reeves," he said, introducing himself properly as he picked up the boots and examined them with genuine appreciation. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here. These are fine boots. Your husband had good taste." "Had," Natalie confirmed, her throat tight. "He passed 6 months ago." Something flickered across Ethan's face, a shadow of understanding and sympathy that didn't feel like pity. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply. "That's a hard thing to bear." The shopkeeper had already turned away, muttering under his breath about fools and their money. Natalie carefully folded the bills and tucked them into the small purse she carried, feeling the weight of survival in those pieces of paper. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. You've been more than generous." "Call me Ethan," he said. "And it's not generosity. These are worth every penny." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Madam, I don't mean to be forward, but are you managing all right out at your place? It's none of my business, I know, but this town can be hard on folks trying to make it alone." Natalie felt her spine straighten automatically, that pride that had kept her going through the darkest days rising up. "I'm managing," she said, though they both knew it was only partially true. She was surviving, yes, but thriving was another matter entirely. The small farm was too much for one person, especially a woman who had grown up in a city back east and had only learned farming through Thomas's patient teaching. Ethan nodded slowly, and she could see he wasn't fooled by her brave front. "If you ever need help with anything, my ranch is the big spread west of town, the one with the white fences near Red Rock Creek. Anyone can point you in the right direction. I've got men who work for me, and we help neighbors when we can." "That's very kind," Natalie said, meaning it even as she knew she would likely never take him up on the offer. She had learned the hard way that kindness from men often came with strings attached, expectations she wasn't willing or ready to meet. But something in Ethan's straightforward gaze made her think he might be different. Still, she had been wrong about people before. She left the general store with her head high, very aware that Ethan followed her out onto the dusty main street of Tascosa. The town was quiet in the afternoon heat, most people taking shelter from the relentless sun. A few horses stood tied to hitching posts, their tails swishing lazily at flies. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. "Mrs. Foster," Ethan called out, and she turned to face him, shading her eyes against the glare. "I know you said you're managing, but I have a proposition that might interest you." Natalie felt her guard go up immediately. "What kind of proposition?" "Nothing improper," he said quickly, as if reading her thoughts. "I need someone who knows their way around a kitchen and can keep house. My current housekeeper just left to move back east with her daughter, and I'm living in chaos. It's good, honest work, and it pays $30 a month plus meals. You could keep your place and come out 3 days a week or more if you wanted. $30 a month." The sum was staggering. Natalie had been trying to figure out how to earn even half that. But the thought of working in a man's home, being alone with him or dependent on him, made her cautious. "I don't know," she said slowly. "Think about it," Ethan said. "There's no pressure. I just figured since we both have needs that could help each other, it made sense to mention it. I'm gone most days anyway, working the ranch. You'd mainly have the house to yourself." Before Natalie could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon across the street. 2 men stumbled out, clearly drunk despite the early hour, shouting at each other about a card game gone wrong. One of them shoved the other, and suddenly fists were flying. Ethan moved instinctively, positioning himself between Natalie and the brawl, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, though he made no move to draw it. "We should get you to your wagon," he said calmly, as if drunken brawls were an everyday occurrence. In Tascosa, they probably were. The town had a rough reputation, built on cattle drives and cowboys with money to spend and tempers to lose. "I walked," Natalie admitted. "My wagon lost a wheel last week, and I haven't had the money to fix it." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, though whether in frustration at her situation or something else, she couldn't tell. "Then let me give you a ride home. My horse can carry double, and it's too hot for you to be walking 5 miles in this sun." Natalie wanted to refuse on principle, but practicality won out. The sun was brutal, and she had already walked into town this morning, leaving before dawn to avoid the worst of the heat. The thought of making the return journey in the afternoon blaze was daunting. "All right," she said. "Thank you." His horse was a beautiful bay gelding, tall and well-muscled, the kind of animal that spoke of careful breeding and better care. Ethan untied the reins and then turned to Natalie, offering his hand to help her mount. She took it, grateful for the assistance even as she tried to ignore the way her heart skipped when his hands settled on her waist to lift her into the saddle. She sat sideways in front of him, very aware of his presence as he swung up behind her and gathered the reins. "Which way?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "North Road, about 4 miles out. There's a lightning-struck cottonwood at the turnoff." They rode in silence for a while, the horse's steady gait eating up the dusty road. Natalie tried not to think about how long it had been since she had been this close to a man, how strange and familiar it felt all at once. Thomas had been gone 6 months, but grief had a way of making time feel both endless and impossibly short. Some days she could barely remember his face, and the guilt of that forgetting was almost worse than the loss itself. "How long have you had the ranch?" she asked, more to break the silence than from real curiosity, though she found she did want to know more about this man who had paid $20 for worn boots and offered her employment without expecting anything untoward in return. 5 years, Ethan said. Started with nothing but a claim and a dream, same as most folks out here. Built it up slow and steady. Now I've got about 200 head of cattle and enough land to support them. It's not the biggest spread in Texas, but it's mine. There was pride in his voice, but it was the quiet kind, born of hard work and perseverance rather than arrogance. Natalie found she liked that about him. "Do you have family?" she asked. "Had a brother," Ethan said, and she heard the past tense like a bell tolling. "He was killed in a stampede 3 years back. My parents are both gone too, it's just me now." "I'm sorry," Natalie said, meaning it. Loneliness was something she understood intimately these days. "Life out here is hard," Ethan said simply. "We all lose people. But we keep going because that's what they would want. That's what we owe them." They reached the lightning-struck cottonwood, a massive tree that had been split down the middle by a strike 2 summers ago, its blackened trunk standing like a sentinel at the edge of her property. Ethan turned the horse down the narrow path that led to her homestead, and Natalie felt a familiar mixture of pride and despair as her little house came into view. It was small, just 3 rooms that Thomas had built with his own hands, but it was sturdy and tight against the weather. The problem was everything else. The garden that should have been thriving was struggling, choked with weeds she couldn't keep up with. The chicken coop needed repairs, and half her hens had been taken by coyotes last month. The field where they had planted wheat was an embarrassment, patches of green struggling up through hard earth that she didn't have the strength or equipment to properly plow. She felt Ethan's assessment of her situation in the way he went quiet, taking it all in. When he helped her down from the horse, his touch was gentle, and his face showed nothing but understanding. "You've been doing this all alone?" he asked. "I had some help at first," Natalie said, defensive despite herself. "Neighbors came by after Thomas died. But they have their own places to worry about, and I couldn't keep asking for charity." "It's not charity to help someone," Ethan said. "That's just being decent." He looked around the property again, and she could almost see him thinking, calculating. "Mrs. Foster, I meant what I said about the job. But more than that, you need help here. Your roof is missing shingles, your fence is down in 3 places that I can see, and that well looks like it's about to collapse." Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She didn't want his pity, didn't want him to see how close she was to the edge of failing completely. "I'm doing the best I can," she said, her voice tight. "I know you are," Ethan said, and there was no judgment in his voice, just acknowledgement of a hard truth. "But sometimes doing our best means accepting help when it's offered. I could send a couple of my men over tomorrow to fix the most urgent things. No charge, no expectations, just neighbors helping neighbors." "Why would you do that?" Natalie asked, finally meeting his eyes. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be a terrible housekeeper and a worse cook." A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, making him look younger and more approachable. "Call it an investment in my future comfort," he said. "If you turn out to be a terrible cook, I'll survive on burned biscuits. I've eaten worse. But I have a feeling about you, Mrs. Foster. I think you're stronger than you know, and I think you're exactly the kind of person who keeps their word and works hard. Am I wrong?" Natalie found herself shaking her head slowly. "No," she admitted. "You're not wrong." "Then think about my offer," Ethan said. "Both offers. Let me help fix up your place and come work for me a few days a week. It'll give you breathing room to figure out what you want to do long term. If you decide to sell this place and move on, that's fine. If you decide to stay and make a go of it, that's fine too. But right now, you need help, and I'm offering it freely." He mounted his horse again, settling into the saddle with easy grace. "I'll send my men by tomorrow morning regardless," he said. "They'll fix your roof and your well and patch up what they can. You can decide about the job on your own time. No pressure either way." Before Natalie could protest, or thank him, or do anything other than stand there in stunned silence, he tipped his hat to her and rode off, leaving her alone in the yard with $20 in her pocket and a confusing swirl of emotions in her chest. She watched until he disappeared down the road, then turned to look at her struggling homestead with new eyes. That night, she lay in the bed she had once shared with Thomas and thought about Ethan Reeves. She thought about his kind eyes and his straightforward manner, the way he had offered help without making her feel small or incapable. She thought about his loneliness, recognizing it because it mirrored her own. And she thought about his offer, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle she needed to solve. By morning, she had made her decision, though she wasn't entirely sure it was the right one. But when 3 men rode up to her homestead just after dawn, tools in hand and friendly smiles on their faces, she was ready for them. "Mr. Reeves sent us," the oldest one said, a grizzled cowboy with gray in his beard. "I'm Charlie, and this here is Tom and Miguel. We're going to fix up what needs fixing." Natalie nodded, grateful and overwhelmed. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate it more than you know." They worked all morning and into the afternoon, and Natalie watched them with amazement. They patched her roof, shored up her well, fixed her chicken coop, and even managed to repair 3 sections of fence. When they finally rode off, declining her offer of what little food she had, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. The next day, she walked into town and asked directions to Ethan's ranch. It was easy to find, just as he had said, a sprawling property with white fences and cattle grazing in green pastures fed by the creek. The house itself was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and windows that gleamed in the sunlight. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding, and waited. When Ethan opened it, he looked surprised to see her, then pleased in a way that made her stomach flutter with something she didn't want to examine too closely. "Mrs. Foster," he said warmly, "this is a pleasant surprise." "I came to accept your offer," Natalie said, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "The job, I mean, if it's still available." "It is," Ethan said immediately. "Come in, please. Let me show you around." The inside of the house was chaos, just as he had described. Dishes were piled in the kitchen, dust covered every surface, and she could see laundry heaped in a corner. But underneath the mess, she could see quality. Good furniture, solid construction, a house that had been built to last and to be a real home. "I know it's bad," Ethan said, sounding almost embarrassed. "I've been trying to keep up, but ranching doesn't leave much time for housekeeping." "It's nothing that can't be fixed," Natalie said, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "I can come 3 days a week to start. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'll cook, clean, do laundry, whatever you need." "That sounds perfect," Ethan said. "And the pay is $30 a month, like I said. I'll give you half at the middle of the month and half at the end. Does that work?" "Yes," Natalie said. "When do you want me to start? How about now?" Ethan asked with a slight smile. I'll ride you home before dark, but if you're willing, you could make a start on the kitchen. I'd consider it a personal favor. I've been eating my own cooking for 2 weeks, and I'm pretty sure I'm slowly poisoning myself." Despite herself, Natalie laughed, the sound surprising her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. "All right," she said. "Let me see what I can do." She rolled up her sleeves and got to work, and it felt good to have purpose again, to be doing something useful. She washed dishes and scrubbed counters, swept floors and wiped down cabinets. Ethan disappeared outside to work, and she was alone with her thoughts and the satisfying rhythm of domestic labor. When the kitchen was clean, she investigated the pantry and found it well stocked with supplies. She could make a proper meal, something hearty and filling. She found salt pork and beans, flour and lard, dried apples and cinnamon. By the time Ethan came back in, dusty and tired from whatever work he had been doing, the house smelled of cooking food and the table was set for two. "I didn't expect this," Ethan said, looking at the table with something like wonder. "Mrs. Foster, you didn't have to. You're paying me to cook," Natalie said practically. "And it's dinner time. Besides, I need to eat too." They sat down together, and it felt strange and right all at once. Ethan ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that felt genuine rather than flattering. They talked about small things, comfortable things. He told her about his cattle and his plans for expanding his herd. She told him about Thomas, finding it easier to talk about him than she had expected, and Ethan listened without trying to offer empty comfort or change the subject. "He sounds like he was a good man," Ethan said when she finished. "He was," Natalie agreed. "I miss him every day." "That's how you know it was real," Ethan said quietly. "The missing doesn't go away, but it gets easier to carry. At least, that's what I've found." After dinner, Ethan kept his word and rode her home, and this time the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. When they reached her homestead, he helped her down from the horse and lingered for a moment. "Thank you for today," he said. "It's nice to come home to a clean house and a good meal. I'd forgotten what that was like." "I'll see you Monday," Natalie said, and he nodded and rode off into the gathering dusk. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that became routine. Natalie would walk to Ethan's ranch 3 times a week, though he often met her partway with his horse to give her a ride. She would spend the day cleaning and cooking, doing laundry and mending, all the tasks that kept a house running. Ethan was gone most of the time, working on the ranch with his men, but sometimes he would come in for lunch or take a break to talk with her while she worked. She found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. Ethan was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. He was respectful always, never crossing lines or making her uncomfortable, but there was something in the way he looked at her sometimes that made her heart race. On her days at home, she worked on her own place, and she could see the difference Ethan's help had made. With her roof repaired and her well secure, with fences that actually kept predators out, she was able to focus on the garden and the chickens. The wheat field was still struggling, but she had plans for it next season. For the first time since Thomas died, she could see a future that didn't involve losing everything. One Monday morning in late September, she arrived at Ethan's ranch to find him in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and looking troubled. His usual easy smile was absent, and there was tension in the set of his shoulders. "What's wrong?" Natalie asked immediately, setting down her basket. Ethan looked up, seeming to debate whether to tell her. Finally, he sighed. "I have to go to Fort Worth for a cattle sale," he said. "It's a big opportunity, could really help the ranch, but it means being gone for at least 2 weeks. I don't like leaving the place, and I don't like—" He stopped himself. "Don't like what?" Natalie prompted gently. I don't like the idea of not seeing you for 2 weeks, Ethan admitted, his ears going slightly red. I've gotten used to having you around. This place feels empty when you're not here. Natalie's breath caught. They had been dancing around this thing between them for weeks now, this growing attraction that neither of them had acknowledged out loud. She should probably discourage it, should keep things professional and distant. But the truth was, she had gotten used to him too. She looked forward to their conversations, to the way he made her laugh, to the feeling of safety and companionship he provided. "I'll miss you too," she said softly, the admission feeling both terrifying and necessary. Ethan stood up, crossing the kitchen to stand in front of her. He was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Natalie," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I know it hasn't been that long since Thomas passed, and I know you might not be ready for this, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have become more than just those of an employer. You're the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing on my mind at night. I care about you more than I probably should." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. "Ethan," she whispered, "I care about you too. I didn't think I would ever feel this way again, and I feel guilty sometimes, like I'm betraying Thomas's memory. But I can't help how I feel." "Thomas would want you to be happy," Ethan said gently. "He would want you to live and love again. That's not betrayal. That's honoring his memory by not letting grief destroy you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face in his hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and Natalie leaned into the touch without thinking. "When I get back from Fort Worth," Ethan said, his voice low and intense, "I'd like to court you properly. No more pretending this is just a business arrangement. I want to take you to dinner, to dances, to show you off to the whole town if you'll let me. I want to see where this can go between us." "Yes," Natalie said, the word barely more than a breath. "Yes, I'd like that." Ethan smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But he stepped back instead, giving her space, and she was grateful for his restraint even as part of her wished he had been less of a gentleman. "I'll be back before you know it," Ethan said. "Charlie will be here running things while I'm gone. If you need anything, anything at all, you go to him and he'll help you." "I'll be fine," Natalie assured him. "You focus on your cattle sale and don't worry about me." The 2 weeks of Ethan's absence dragged by slowly. Natalie found herself missing him constantly, missing their conversations and his steady presence. She still went to the ranch on her regular days to keep the house in order, and Charlie and the other ranch hands were respectful and kind, but it wasn't the same without Ethan there. She used the time to think about what she wanted, about what a future with Ethan might look like. The guilt over Thomas had faded to a distant ache, and she knew in her heart that Ethan was right. Thomas would want her to be happy, to find love again, to live a full life. She was only 25 years old. She had years ahead of her, and she didn't want to spend them alone. When Ethan finally returned, riding up to the ranch house on a Thursday afternoon when she was there cleaning, Natalie dropped the dish towel she was holding and ran out to meet him without thinking. He swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly. "I missed you," Ethan said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," Natalie said, looking up at him. "How was the sale?" "Successful," Ethan said. "Very successful, but I'll tell you about it later. Right now, I just want to look at you." They stood there in the yard holding each other, and Natalie felt something click into place in her chest. This was right. This was where she was supposed to be. Over the following months, Ethan courted her with a single-minded determination that was both flattering and overwhelming. He took her to Saturday night dances in town, where they spun around the floor while the fiddle played and everyone watched with knowing smiles. He brought her flowers from the meadow, and once, memorably, a bolt of beautiful blue fabric that he said matched her eyes. He fixed things around her homestead without being asked, showing up on Sundays with tools and a willingness to work. But more than the gifts or the gestures, it was the way he talked to her that won her heart completely. He treated her like an equal, asking her opinion on ranch matters and actually listening to her answers. He told her about his dreams and his fears, his past and his hopes for the future. And he listened when she talked, really listened, making her feel heard and valued in a way that made her fall deeper in love with him every day. By Christmas, half the town was expecting a wedding announcement. Natalie could see it in the way people looked at them, the knowing glances and whispered conversations. And when Ethan asked her to have Christmas dinner with him at the ranch, just the two of them, she knew something significant was coming. She spent hours preparing for that dinner, wearing her best dress, the dark green one that Thomas had bought her their first Christmas together. She didn't feel guilty wearing it. Instead, it felt like a blessing, like Thomas was giving his approval to this new chapter of her life. Ethan had decorated the house with pine branches and candles, and the whole place smelled of evergreen and wood smoke. He had cooked, or attempted to, and the results were charmingly terrible. They laughed together over the burned turkey and the lumpy potatoes, then remade dinner together, working side by side in the kitchen like they had done 100 times before. After they ate, Ethan led her into the parlor where a fire crackled in the hearth. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him, and Natalie felt her heart begin to pound as he took her hands in his. "Natalie," he said, his voice serious, "I know we've only been courting for a few months, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're everything I've ever wanted. You're smart and strong and beautiful, and you make me want to be a better man. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone." He dropped to one knee, and Natalie gasped, tears already streaming down her face. From his pocket, he pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the firelight. "Will you marry me?" Ethan asked. "Will you be my wife and build a life with me here? I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. I'll love you and protect you and stand by you through whatever comes. Please say yes." "Yes," Natalie said through her tears. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you. I love you so much." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and this time he did kiss her, a deep, passionate kiss that made her knees weak and her heart sore. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, he slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. "I was so nervous you'd say no," Ethan admitted. "I know it's fast and I know people will talk." "Let them talk," Natalie said fiercely. "I don't care what anyone says. I know what I feel and I know what I want. I want you, Ethan. I want this life with you." They were married in February of 1884 in a small ceremony at the church in Tascosa. Natalie wore a new dress that Ethan had insisted on buying her, white with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore his best suit and the boots she had sold him, polished to a shine. The whole town turned out for the wedding, even the people who had whispered about the widow and the rancher moving too fast. But when they saw the way Ethan and Natalie looked at each other, the joy and love evident in every glance and touch, even the skeptics had to admit it was a true match. Charlie served as Ethan's best man, and the shopkeeper's wife stood up with Natalie, having become a friend over the past months. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed his bride with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed and cheered. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables of food and music and dancing. Natalie felt like she was floating, held safe in the circle of Ethan's arms as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. She thought of Thomas briefly, with love and gratitude, knowing that he had brought her to Texas and given her the foundation she needed to survive long enough to find this new happiness. She didn't feel guilt, only a bittersweet gratitude for what had been and hope for what was to come. That night, in the bedroom that was now theirs together, Ethan was gentle and patient, treating her like she was something precious. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and afterward, Natalie lay in his arms and felt more complete than she had in years. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Natalie said honestly. "I feel like I've come home, Ethan, not to a place but to you." "That's exactly how I feel," Ethan said. "Like everything in my life led me to that day in the general store when I saw you selling those boots. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to change." "Did you really need boots?" Natalie asked, suddenly curious. Ethan laughed softly. "No," he admitted. "I have 3 pairs already." "But you looked so desperate, and that shopkeeper was trying to cheat you, and I just knew I had to help. The boots were just an excuse." Natalie propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, mock outrage on her face. "You spent $20 on boots you didn't need." "Best $20 I ever spent," Ethan said, pulling her down for a kiss. "It got you to notice me, didn't it?" "I would have noticed you anyway," Natalie said. "You're not exactly easy to overlook." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Natalie dreamed of the future for the first time in months. Not nightmares of loss and struggle, but beautiful dreams of a life built together. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and harder lessons. Natalie sold her small homestead to a young couple just starting out, using the money to buy supplies and stock for the ranch. It was bittersweet to let go of the place she had shared with Thomas, but it felt right. That chapter of her life was closed, and this new one was just beginning. She moved her few possessions to Ethan's ranch, which was now their ranch, and set about making the house truly a home. She planted flowers around the porch and curtains for the windows. She organized the chaos and brought warmth and comfort to every room. Ethan watched her transformation of his bachelor dwelling with amazed appreciation. "I didn't know a house could feel like this," he said one evening, looking around the parlor where Natalie had hung pictures and arranged furniture into cozy groupings. "I've lived here for 5 years, but it never felt like home until you came." Natalie smiled and kissed him. "That's because a house isn't a home without love in it," she said, "and we have plenty of that." They worked the ranch together, Natalie learning the cattle business from the ground up. She helped with branding and roundups, learned to ride like she had been born in the saddle, and proved to have a natural head for the financial side of ranching. Ethan relied on her judgment more and more, and the ranch prospered under their combined efforts. In the spring of 1885, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one morning over breakfast, and he went so pale she thought he might faint. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the chickens and lifted her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Natalie, we're going to be parents." "I hope you're ready for sleepless nights and dirty diapers," Natalie teased, but she was just as excited as he was. She had always wanted children, and the thought of raising a family with Ethan filled her with joy. The pregnancy was healthy but uncomfortable in the Texas heat. Ethan fussed over her constantly, trying to stop her from doing any work, which drove her crazy since she felt perfectly fine. They compromised, with Natalie taking on lighter tasks and letting the ranch hands handle the heavy lifting. In November of 1885, their son was born. It was a long, difficult labor, but when Natalie finally held the squalling red baby in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. Ethan cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny fingers and toes. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered. "Natalie, he's absolutely perfect." They named him James Thomas Reeves, honoring both Ethan's brother and Natalie's first husband. It felt right to acknowledge the past while celebrating the future. When Natalie whispered the name to her newborn son, she felt a sense of peace, like all the pieces of her life had finally come together in this perfect moment. Being parents transformed them both. Ethan was a natural father, patient and loving, never complaining about the sleepless nights or the crying. He would walk the floor with James for hours, singing off key lullabies and telling stories about the ranch and the cattle. Natalie watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. The next few years were busy and full. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more land, more cattle, and hired additional hands to help with the work. Natalie kept the books and managed the house, while Ethan oversaw the day-to-day operations. They were a team in every sense of the word, partners in business and in life. In 1887, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah Marie. She had Natalie's blue eyes and Ethan's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. The house that had once been too quiet was now filled with the noise and chaos of family life. There were toys scattered across floors, childish laughter ringing through the halls, and the constant mess that came with small children. Natalie had never been happier. One evening in the summer of 1888, after the children were in bed, Natalie and Ethan sat on the porch swing, watching the sun set over their land. The cattle were dark shapes in the distance, and the air was filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Natalie asked, leaning her head on Ethan's shoulder. "How everything had to happen exactly the way it did for us to find each other, all the time," Ethan said, his arm around her. "I think about how I almost didn't go into town that day. I had 1,000 things to do on the ranch, but something told me to go. And there you were, trying to sell those boots." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry about what you had to go through to get here, Natalie. I'm sorry you had to lose Thomas and struggle the way you did." "I'm not," Natalie said, and when Ethan looked at her in surprise, she explained, "Don't get me wrong, I wish Thomas hadn't died. But everything I went through made me who I am. It made me strong enough to take a chance on you, to risk loving again. If life had been easy, I might not have appreciated what we have. I might have taken it for granted." "You could never take anything for granted," Ethan said with certainty. "That's one of the things I love most about you. You see the value in everything and everyone." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently until Natalie spoke again. "I want to tell you something," she said, "something I've never told anyone." "You can tell me anything," Ethan said. "The day I sold Thomas's boots, I was planning to give up," Natalie admitted. "I had decided that if I couldn't get enough money for them, I was going to pack up what I could carry and leave. I was going to abandon the homestead and go back east, admit defeat. I had given up hope." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "But you didn't," he said. "Because of you," Natalie said. "Because you paid $20 for worn boots and offered me a job and treated me like I mattered. You gave me hope when I had none left, Ethan. You saved my life in more ways than one." "You saved mine too," Ethan said quietly. I was so lonely before you came. I had the ranch and the work, but I didn't have a reason to care about any of it beyond simple survival. You gave me purpose, Natalie. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to build something lasting. We saved each other." Natalie turned to kiss him, a slow, deep kiss that held all the love and gratitude she felt. When they pulled apart, both smiling, she said, "So what do we do now?" "Now," Ethan said, his eyes twinkling. "Now we live. We raise our children and build our ranch and love each other every single day. We honor the people we lost by being happy, by making the most of this life we've built together." "That sounds perfect," Natalie said. And it was. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the usual trials of life in the West but blessed with love and family. They added 2 more children to their brood, twin boys born in 1890 who were as wild as the Texas wind and kept their parents constantly on their toes. The ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Ethan's reputation as an honest rancher grew, and Natalie became known for her business acumen and her charitable work in Tascosa. They helped neighbors in need, remembering what it was like to struggle, and their generosity earned them respect and affection throughout the community. James grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. From the time he could walk, he followed Ethan everywhere, learning the business and the land. Sarah was bright and spirited, with a gift for numbers that had her keeping the ranch books by the time she was 12. The twins, Daniel and David, were inseparable troublemakers who brought chaos and laughter wherever they went through it all. Ethan and Natalie's love never wavered. They had their arguments, of course, as any couple did. There were disagreements about money and child rearing, about ranch business and household matters. But they always talked things through, always came back to the foundation of respect and affection that had brought them together in the first place. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Ethan surprised Natalie with a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and the children for more than a day since they married, and it felt like a honeymoon. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, and danced in a real ballroom. But mostly, they just enjoyed being together, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. "I can't believe it's been 10 years. Natalie said as they danced on their last night in San Antonio. "It feels like yesterday that I was standing in that general store, desperate and alone. Look at you now," Ethan said proudly. "A successful rancher, a wonderful mother, the heart of our community. You're amazing, Natalie." "We're amazing together," Natalie corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. Partners," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "Always and forever." "Always and forever," Natalie agreed. As they grew older, they watched their children grow up and start families of their own. James married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and brought her home to help run the operation. Sarah shocked everyone by going to teachers' college and then returning to Tascosa to open a school. The twins took after their father, both becoming ranchers, though they competed good-naturedly about who had the better cattle. Ethan and Natalie became grandparents, delighting in the next generation. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, taking them on rides around the ranch and telling them stories about the old days. The house that had once been too quiet was once again filled with the sounds of children, though these ones went home at the end of the day, allowing Ethan and Natalie to enjoy their peace and quiet. In their later years, they would sit on that same porch swing, now worn smooth by decades of use, and watch the sun set over land they had worked and loved for so many years. Their hair had gone gray, their faces lined with age, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Giving up your independence to marry me, you could have rebuilt your homestead, made a life for yourself." "Never," Natalie said firmly. "Not for a single second. You and our children and this life we built together are the best things that ever happened to me. I wouldn't change a single moment." "Not even the hard parts?" Ethan asked. "The droughts and the difficult births and the times we nearly lost everything." "Especially not the hard parts," Natalie said. "Those are what made us strong. Those are what taught us we could survive anything as long as we had each other." Ethan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Natalie Reeves. I have loved you from the moment I saw you in that general store, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Natalie said, "more than words can say." They lived to see their grandchildren grow up and start having children of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of family, all of whom existed because 2 lonely people had found each other at exactly the right moment. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and the Reeves name became synonymous with integrity and success in Texas ranching. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Natalie grieved deeply but found comfort in their children and grandchildren and in the memories of a life well lived. She knew he had been ready to go, tired from a full life of hard work and love. She continued to live in the ranch house, surrounded by family, until she joined him 2 years later. At her funeral, her children talked about her strength and her kindness, about how she had overcome tragedy to build something beautiful. They talked about the love story of Ethan and Natalie, how it had started with a pair of boots and a chance meeting, and had grown into something that touched everyone who knew them. Sarah, now a grandmother herself, told the story to her own grandchildren years later, wanting them to understand the legacy they carried. "Your great-grandmother was selling her dead husband's boots because she had no other choice," Sarah said. "She was desperate and alone, and she thought her life was over. But then your great-grandfather walked into that store and saw something in her worth saving. He bought those boots for far more than they were worth, and in doing so, he bought a future for both of them." "What happened to the boots?" one of the great-grandchildren asked. Sarah smiled. "They're in the barn, in a special case your great-grandfather built. He kept them all those years because they represented the beginning of his greatest adventure. He used to say that those boots walked him right into his destiny." The children giggled, but they understood the importance of the story. It was a reminder that life could change in an instant, that hope could be found in the darkest moments, and that love could heal even the deepest wounds. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But the heart of it all, the foundation everything else was built on, was the love between a widow who had lost everything and a rancher who was brave enough to see past her grief to the woman underneath. They say that on quiet evenings, if you sit on the old porch swing at the ranch house, you can almost hear the echo of their laughter, the soft murmur of their conversations, the sound of a love story that began with boots and ended with a legacy that will last forever. It's a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments, and that taking a chance on love, even when it seems impossible, can lead to a happiness beyond imagination. The last time anyone saw those boots, they were still in perfect condition, lovingly maintained through the decades. They sit in their case in the barn, a monument to a moment that changed 2 lives forever. Above them hangs a small plaque that Ethan commissioned shortly before his death, and on it is engraved a simple message. "These boots led me home to you. always and forever, E to N. It's a message of love that transcends time, a reminder to every generation that comes after that true love exists, that it's worth fighting for, and that sometimes destiny wears worn leather boots and carries a price tag of $20. The story of Ethan and Natalie became legend in their family and in the community, a tale told around dinner tables and at family gatherings, always ending the same way, with two people who found each other when they needed it most and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the end, that's what matters most. Not the struggles or the hardships, not the money or the success, but the love. The pure, honest, enduring love between two people who took a chance on each other and discovered that together they could overcome anything. That's the legacy of the widow and the rancher, the woman who sold her dead husband's boots, and the man who bought them and her heart. It's a legacy of hope and healing, of second chances and new beginnings, of a love story that proves fairy tales can come true, even in the dusty, difficult reality of the Wild West. And so the story ends as all the best stories do, with love triumphant and a family blessed, with struggles overcome and dreams realized, with two souls who found each other across the hardest circumstances and held on through everything life threw at them. They lived, they loved, they built something lasting, and they left behind proof that the human heart is capable of remarkable resilience, and that love, real love, can conquer anything. That is the story of Ethan Reeves and Natalie Foster Reeves, two ordinary people who created an extraordinary life together, all because of a pair of boots and the courage to take a chance on a stranger who would become everything.